Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sportsbook Confidential. My name is John Sullivan, and I'm coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in Seneca Falls, New York. And this little show here is to help you learn and grow as a sports bettor. And we have an interesting show today. We're going to talk a little about sports betting theory and the long-term process of becoming an experienced sports bettor, the continual improvement that's required. It's what I like to call the continuous learning curve of sports betting. And we also have Friday Night NHL as usual, and we have our first Friday of March Madness, which I'm excited about. So we'll talk about several ball games going on tonight in the hoops world. But before we get into that, as we always do, I'm going to start by updating my bankroll. And last week I forgot to give out my picks, and I wondered why I finished a couple minutes early, but that's why. Since I didn't have any picks for you, the bankroll is unchanged, $584. And as we divide by 30 to get our new bet size of $19 going forward this weekend. So that's where we stand on this particular week. And we'll go right into our sportsbook lesson today. And actually, before I start going into the lesson, I'm going to quickly show you a tweet from Rufus Peabody, who is a professional sports bettor who also has a sports betting podcast. His is a lot more analytical than mine, but there was an analytics conference last Friday at MIT in Boston, and Rufus made this comment on Twitter, and this is a really good lead-in to our sportsbook lesson today. Research paper on golf at Sloan Sports Analytic Conference, hoping it has absolutely nothing of value. Now, Rufus is a professional bettor, and he bets on golf, and he does not want other sports bettors to have the same insights that he has on his golf betting. Now, he's trying to be humorous here, but he's actually being semi-serious. There's a lot of experienced sports bettors that have a very effective model or have a very substantial edge over a betting market, and their main goal is to protect that edge at all costs and hope that the rest of the world doesn't catch up to them. But as we're going to find out, everybody eventually does. So let's go back to our sportsbook lesson. We're talking about the continuous learning curve of sports betting. And for most experienced bettors, as we talked about Rufus being an experienced bettor and having a very good model for golf, what they do is they create a predictive model. And we're going to go through that process through the year. This year, we've been talking about different stats, and we're going to use them to create a primitive model and eventually maybe improve on it. So as you can see, second step, improve on model until it becomes profitable. That's basically the process that we are going to go through here in the future. So how do you know if your model's profitable? Well, obviously you bet that model against the betting market. Also, you can do something called back testing. I can argue for both sides of back testing being very effective or not effective, depending on what you're testing. And back testing means you go back through past games and past betting lines and compare how your model works against those previous events. It can work very well. It can work very poorly. But depending on the circumstances, that may be an effective tool and maybe not, but it's worth learning how to do, I think, at any rate. So the next point along the timeline here, it says syndicates or bookmakers may take exceptional models off the market. If somebody comes up with a very, very good model, and I'm going to say this, there was a particular Twitter user I followed who came up with a very, very good hockey model, and his model disappeared off Twitter but turned out that he was actually hired by the NHL to do analytics for the league. But if somebody comes up with a very good model, it's usually interesting whether how public they make it or not. But professional bettors may see value in that model and try to buy it from them or buy the rights to it so nobody can publish it. Or the sports books may actually like the model to help them set better lines. I found that sports books in the U.S. are pretty lazy, and they just follow the bigger offshore books in setting their lines, and then will either take a position based upon the action they get in their local sports books, in their local shops. Over time, various changes will affect the quality of your model. So, we built the model and then we've improved it until it is now profitable. So certain things can happen. These are just a few examples that can throw your model completely out of whack and force you to redo everything. Obviously, rule changes. A quick example, if you have a model for NFL and then you want to use that model for the AAF or the CFL, well, you're going to have to change that model to adjust for the rule changes. There's no kickoffs in the in the AAF, and they have the Rouge point in the CFL, and there's only 3 downs in the CFL. And the point being, but even if the NFL went to a rule change this year, the rule change on challenges or a rule change on extra points going from 35 yards to 45 yards, things like that can have an effect on your model. Innovative game strategy, and what I mean by this is when a revolutionary change comes into the game, not necessarily rules-based, but the way that teams and coaches approach a game. I think the best example of this that people will be familiar with is Duke basketball going from becoming a three-point shooting, a three-point first team, even when they have a player like Zion Williamson in their fold. They are still looking to shoot open threes as opposed to mid-range or twos. They're going to use Zion Williamson to clean the glass and, go up for second chance points. And but they recruit shooters and they look for shooters to be open, even in transition. And that's something that really hit the college game about 10 years ago or so. And you could see that, with Stephen Curry in the NBA, where, three-point became a transition weapon and, a full-time transition weapon and a number one choice in the flow of the offense. So innovative game strategy, that would also include how often you go for it on fourth down, different types of kicking in football, or maybe a new alignment in soccer. Who knows? But every once in a while, every decade or so, there's the run and shoot back in the day in football. There's a new revolutionary strategy that's employed that will make your model less predictive, and you need to adjust for that. And then, of course, sharper lines is another example. The sports books basically get better at handicapping the games and putting out lines that give your model less of an advantage over the marketplace. So basically, over time, your model is going to be less effective because the sports books are just going to get plain better at putting lines out and giving you less advantage. And continuing with our lesson here, so now that we have that timeline about how we always have to change our model, what develops is a cat and mouse game of experienced bettors looking for advantages over the sports book. Sometimes those advantages are trying different sports. I handicapped NFL, but then I got into CFL. I did very well. Excuse me. And, my success in CFL actually reciprocated and helped me become better at NFL as I learned new methods to track the teams and new things to look for when I watch the games that would help me handicap in the future. So this cat and mouse game usually involves improving the model, obviously. The sports books get better. Your model gets less advantageous over time. So that's the the eternal flow of the sports bettor versus the sports book. Now, Rufus is an example. He said on his podcast that he's continually improving his model. He adds in certain things every year and subtracts things sometimes, and he could go. I can't really get into what he does because it's not really known. We don't know what's in the secret sauce, but he talks about it on his podcast, and it's a continual process. Excuse me, of adjustment and improvement. So before we finish up the lesson, let's if you're listening to all this and you say, well, hey, I'm not really into math. What about me? I like to bet on sports. What about the average bettor? What about the the beginning to intermediate bettor, which I try to target this show for? Well, there's things you can do that are common sense that are going to help you if you're not into model building. Number one is shopping for the best lines. Obviously, if you have different sports books to choose from, and hopefully in New York here we'll have 3 or 4 of them in the next year or so. You'll have one sports book might offer the Jets +3, and another sports book might offer the Jets +4. Obviously, you want to take the extra point in that scenario. The second thing is reduced juice. If DraftKings is offering the Jets -1, the Buffalo Sabres to win at -112, and another sportsbook is offering MGM's offering it at -110. Well, you want to take the -110 because you're paying less juice. You're getting a better return on your investment. And then there's qualitative factors that you can take into account. That there are always things that you can take into account that don't necessarily involve numbers. The weather, of course, that can affect an over/under. Sometimes it might not, and the market moves anyway. So if you thought it was going over and the bad weather made the total go down, well, you may still think it's going to go over, and that may give you a better number on the total. Injuries, of course, if you have insight into, say, a local game where you have injury information on the local coverage. It's pretty much everything's on the internet these days. But that is something that some models account for and some do not. Some you can, if you have a model, you can plug in a replacement player into your model. It's like for baseball. If a different third baseman's going to start, what his win. There's all kinds of stats for every player. Baseball's probably the most analytic of all the sports. But the point being is you can injuries can affect may not be represented in the total, or may most people think that players have a lot of influence on the point spread. Most of them do not. Quarterback obviously does. Kicker can. I think that a punter is a very important position in football, and I believe that's totally undervalued in most models. But injuries is something that can have a factor that does. You don't have to be a math guy to understand how that will impact a game. And then team decision making. I don't want to say this is just coaching, but there's a decision making process for each team, and usually the head coach has the final say. But when they go, when do they go for it on 4th down versus when they don't? When they go for a touchdown, a first down or a touchdown instead of a field goal, when a coach decides to challenge. Interesting, in the CFL, they messed around with the challenge, the replay, and I really like what they have now, where they only have one challenge per game. So it's up to the coach to figure out when to use this challenge. Sometimes there's a game, there's a challenge that's easily winnable in the first series of the game, but do you save it or not? It's a difficult decision. It's not easy to make. My favorite NFL example of team decision-making is John Fox, who's no longer a coach, but when he coached the Broncos, he would always punt. Very rarely went for it on first down. He had a very good defense, I will say. But you could count on him being a very, very conservative coach, what I call field position game or playing not to lose. And that was easy to play the over-unders with him. And it was easy when there were big spreads because teams like that try to keep one possession games, and so if there's the spread on the game is 14 points, that's a lot of points in a game like that where one of the two participants is going to try to shorten the game and make it as defensive as possible. So those are things that a beginning or intermediate sports bettor can look at and use to help handicap a game that don't require a model. But as you get more experienced, you're going to realize that certain stats have help you significantly in handicapping a game, and then you're going to try to manage those stats, whether it be in a spreadsheet or whatever. And that's basically what you're doing is building a model, whether you realize it or not. And we're all going to get to that point at some point, and we'll talk about it on the show at future points. So that's it for the Sportsbook lesson today. I hope you find some of that useful. Next week we'll have a review of the new ESPN sports betting show that's going to premiere on Monday, and I may tie the Sportsbook lesson into that, depending what they do, but we'll see. So let's move on to the NHL tonight. We got 4 games on the schedule. Let's just go over them quickly. We have the Wild at the Panthers. The Wild are holding on to a playoff spot in the West. The Panthers are pretty much out of it now. In the East, they've lost 6 in a row. Not really sure what happened to them. They really haven't had any. Luongo's had a few really good games this year, but he's been injured and struggled somewhat in the second half. The Wild have actually played really well over the last couple of weeks without Zach Parise, I might add. So they are looking pretty good. I do like the Wild here in this game. The odds are not anywhere near attractive enough to bet on either side. Then you have the Devils at the Capitals. The Capitals have been playing really well. As I've said before, they've been very good at resting their players throughout the season, and you may see some of that tonight. These odds are crazy. If you could get the Devils +2, you could probably still get. Very few sportsbooks will offer it at +2. Most of them offer it at 1.5, but 2, you could still get plus money. And, the Devils are really kind of just mailing it in the rest of the year. Taylor Hall is out. Corey Schneider's playing, and he started the season like 0-7 and went on IR. And then he's come back and basically won 4 in a row, even though he hasn't been spectacular. But I could see this game staying within 2 goals. So those are very good odds for the Devils, considering. But that's just not a good bet. Attractive odds, but the numbers say that the Capitals are going to win, even if they rest a player or two. The Jets at the Hurricanes, this intrigues me the most. Now, the Hurricanes and the St. Louis Blues have been the best teams in the league since the first of the year, and they continue to win, although they lost in Boston the other night wearing their Whaler jerseys. The Jets at +145 is a very attractive number. I like this a lot. The Jets are a team that can compete with anybody. They have struggled as late. They really haven't just played that well overall. I like their goaltending. I think they have better goaltending than the Hurricanes. Although the Hurricanes have just overachieved in goaltending. I think that's going to change when the playoffs starts. I really do. And the game gets more physical because it's a whole different style of hockey in the playoffs. But tonight, The Jets at plus 145 is a very attractive number. You have to kind of lean the Jets there. These teams are very equal in talent. It'll be interesting to see if the Jets can get physical and, kind of use that to help their possession numbers. And then finally, you got a coin flip, the Canadians at the Ducks. Canadians just played at San Jose last night, and they came up short. And the Ducks, they have Gibson and Miller as their goaltenders right now, and those are their two best goaltenders. They are playing out the string, but they have some good young talent, and I feel like this game is priced appropriately, very even. If anything, I would take one of those teams on the 1.5, minus 1.5 to get a good number, but I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, so we'll see which one of these ends up on my picks, and we'll go from there. But that's it for this Friday in NHL, and so now we're going to get started in our March Madness. We have some conference tournaments today, and we have some top 25 games today, and I'm going to, just quickly go over these games, and we'll have a few picks for you, and that's where we'll wrap it up with our picks. So let's take a look at, we got Bowling Green at the University of Buffalo. Go Bulls. 14 points is the spread. I did not put the totals in on these games because the totals are juiced at minus 115 on both sides. Don't really care for that. I don't really, unless the juice gets better, I do not want, I'm just not interested in betting the total. So Bowling Green at Buffalo. Bowling Green has a very decent record at 20-10. They're 2 games behind in the standings to Buffalo, and they're getting 14 points. And there's not injuries involved in this game. Buffalo's very good. They played earlier in the season, and it was very close. And I looked at Bowling Green's last 10 games, and there was only one that they lost by more than 14 points. Every other game, I think they were 7-3, and in the 3 losses, they were, except for that one, they were very close, and I think the other 2 were overtime losses. There's no reason not to take the points here. I feel like it was 14.5 when I got up this morning, and now it's 14. I would be surprised if it didn't get down to 12 or 11 by game time. Minnesota at 24th ranked Maryland. Maryland minus 7.5. This is one of those, here's my narrative, senior night games. A lot of teams will start all their seniors in their last home game. These teams are even though Maryland's in the top 25, these teams are pretty evenly matched, and 7.5 points is a lot. There's no distinct advantage for either team in the 3-point shooting or free throw shooting departments. I think 7.5 is a lot, and I like the Gophers here just to cover. They could win the game. I don't know what the money line is. I don't. It would have to be very attractive to bet on it, but I do like the 7.5 points here. And then Miami, Florida at Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech's 11th now, or they're close to the top 10. Minus 9.5. Again, you've got another senior night game, and you've also got, a team that is probably resting up for the ACC tournament. This is a team that, if it runs and guns, could beat Miami by more than 10. However, don't know. That's a lot of points for that game. I don't feel comfortable laying 9.5. If it was like 7.5, I'd probably take Virginia Tech. If it was 13.5, 14, I'd probably take Miami. Go with that what you will. It could be a laugher. It depends on the effort of the Hurricanes, but I don't know if there's anything to play for as far as a bye for the Hokies. I believe the top 4 seeds gets what's called a double bye in the ACC. The bottom 12 teams play out with a single bye, and then the bottom teams play in that first round. So then in the Ivy League, which is not conference tournament time yet, Yale at Penn, these are probably the two best teams in the league. Yale's getting 1 point on the road. I think Yale is the cream of the crop. In the Ivy League, I like Yale +1. Maybe it'll go back to 2 or 3. At 3, I love Yale getting a possession worth of points. We'll see. I think that this game is going to be very close. So for some reason it moves one direction or the other. It makes me wonder. But so this is the last weekend of Ivy League. I'm not exactly sure if there's continuing the same format, but the Ivy League went to a league tournament, I think, but only the top 4 teams play. It's just the top 4 play, semifinals and finals. I could be wrong. Maybe it's changed. On to Citadel versus Samford. This is obviously neutral site, Southern League conference tournament. And you have the Citadel who beat Samford earlier in the year. And these two teams are very evenly matched. Citadel getting 4.5 on a neutral court. No real advantage, again, in the shooting percentages. Although, if you go by their last 5, one of the teams has performed a little bit better than the other. But getting 4.5 points, more than one possession on a neutral court on two teams that are very even, I like the Citadel. This is one of those games where you don't like to bet on bad. Like I don't like to bet on a matchup of two bad teams because they're teams that have not performed well during the season. There's issues of inconsistency and effort versus teams that just do not have a talent level. So you get two teams that have performed poorly over the season, and you have to kind of weed all those attributes out. But this game is two evenly matched teams. I'm taking the points there if I had to choose. And then Pepperdine versus my favorite college team, Loyola Marymount. My all-time favorite college basketball team is the 89 and the 90 Loyola Marymount teams with Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball. They don't play that style of basketball anymore, but I do follow the West Coast Conference. And Loyola is probably, I think, in my opinion, likely the second best team after Gonzaga. Some people may argue St. Mary's or one of the others. I wouldn't be surprised to see Loyola make it up to a matchup with Gonzaga. I like them -5 here versus Pepperdine on a neutral court here in the conference tournament. And then finally, Jacksonville State versus Murray State in the Ohio Valley Conference. The final 4 teams of the Ohio Valley Conference, they all have excellent records. They all have 20-something wins. Murray State, again, neutral court here. Murray State has been consistently good. They have the better coaching. -5.5, you're looking at a 2-possession game. I do feel like they can cover the 5.5 here. I would love to see that 4.5. I'd jump all over it at 4.5. But 5.5 is maybe 5 would be okay. 5.5 is, depends what odds you get. If you're getting plus money, maybe it's worth it there. You can buy the point. I don't know, but I like Murray State to be in the conference finals for sure. They'll likely face Belmont at some point, and that will be a very interesting game to watch. There might be an at-large at stake there. So let's wrap it up, and I got 6 picks for you this week since I only had I had 0 picks last week. But in hockey tonight, I have the Jets money line +145. I'm betting against the Hurricanes again, and they have spanked me pretty much since the first of the year. But this is a very juicy number. The Jets are a very good team, and I could see them winning this game. Winnipeg Jets at +145. And then we have Bowling Green +14, -111. That's just too many points for a team that's an upper echelon team in the MAC. I have Minnesota +7.5, -108. I feel like they're going to be competitive with Maryland tonight. Then we have in the Ivy League, the 2 best teams in the Ivy League facing off, Yale +1, -105. Like that very much. The Citadel +4.5, -110. And my fifth pick for college basketball tonight, Loyola Marymount -5, -107. I passed on the Murray State game, but that's a lot of basketball picks for me. We'll see how it goes. So hopefully we'll build some bankroll this week, and we'll be back next week to talk about some new sports betting programming, and we'll have a new sportsbook lesson, and we'll be in full swing with March Madness. We'll be right in the middle of the ACC tournament. It'll be very exciting. I'm going to play the outro music for you now, and let's get some winners. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.